it's scary no matter what. I think if you have something that you're passionate about and you find that you would do it for free or learn about it all the time, that's probably a good choice to follow that.
You're listening to the Kristof Lewis Podcast, a podcast where I have conversations with inspirational people. My name is Chris, but my family calls me Kristof. My goal is to have as many conversations as possible with people who have forged their own path by pursuing their dreams, making them a reality, all the while emitting positivity and sharing this knowledge with others. I seek these people out and share this information with you, proving to the world that you can do what makes you happy and do what you want for a living while being a good human being. We'll talk about careers, but we'll also cover any story that inspires. Let's do this while helping each other. Thanks for listening. I'm happy you're here. Hey everyone, welcome to the Kristof Lewis Podcast, Create Your Career. This is conversation number 126, episode number 208. There are two segments within the podcast, the conversations where I speak with guests, and then the contemplations where it's just me. Thank you so much for being here. I never take it for granted, and I'm always excited. These conversations, like I say, are just as much for me as for everything else that the podcast stands on, because when I have a crappy day, I come in here, I look forward to having a conversation. I know I'm going to feel great coming out of it on the other end, so I encourage you to have your own conversations as well. My guest today is none other than Bri Berner. Bri is a business coach and she is an incredible person. This was such a fun conversation. We talked about being a forever student and why that is so important in life. Bri told us about a vulnerable childhood story that I was really excited to hear her say, because it opened up that transparency on why she's doing the things she's doing right now and why she's helping the people that she's helping right now. Because you know that it's one thing to go out there and be awesome, but it's another thing. I want to encourage people to help other people even as you help yourself. So stay tuned for that. And one of the cool things, we talked about a lot of things, but one of the other cool things was the seventh why. What does that mean? Stay tuned to find out. And remember, there's a new segment within the podcast where on Instagram, I put out a question sticker 24 hours before we record, and you're able to submit questions that I asked the guest. So look out for those on Instagram at Kristof Lewis, and I'll ask a couple of those questions. And tonight, those were really good questions yet again. Remember, you can find this podcast and all other episodes, the conversations, the contemplations on kristoflewis.com/podcast and on your favorite podcast listening app, and you can find me on Instagram at Kristof Lewis. So thank you so much for being here. The best way to help the podcast out is to share it. And just, if somebody needs to hear this stuff, man, it could really help them and it could really change it around for them. They could change their life around more than you know. All right, without further ado, welcome to the Kristof Lewis Podcast, Create Your Career.
Yeah, thanks, Kristof. I'm so excited to talk to you and love that we already have a few mutual friends in common. So thanks for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. I say it every episode. I'm beyond excited to have these. It's so good for me. I'll be honest with you. I was in a super big funk before this. I was talking to my wife. I was like, oh my gosh, I owe Bri the best podcast conversation ever. And she was like talking me down from the ledge. But I just know that these things help me so much. And I just, right off the bat, I'm going to go into encouraging everybody to have conversations even when they feel uncomfortable. But going back to what you said, being connected with the people that we're connected with is so important to me, because those people are inspirations in my life. I was telling you, one of those two friends I've known for 10 years, and that guy is one of the few guys that I still keep in contact with, and that's for good reason. And then the other person you've worked with and I think continue to work with, and she's just crushing it. Like, I'm so proud of her, and it's just really fun. So again, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to be connected in such a way. But before we get into the rest of the episode, do you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll explain a little bit about who I am and kind of give context to this story, because I think it's pretty important. But I myself am a former online coach and online personal trainer. And now I've moved into teaching other people how to really start and launch their health coaching businesses online. And that came from a place of basically me not knowing anything when I was a personal trainer, or how to go about starting something online. That was back in like 2014. So the beginning of online health coaching really becoming a thing. And I had personally a pretty big physical transformation And that's how kind of I had the idea that I could maybe start doing online coaching. But back in 2014, I knew nothing about what that looked like as far as like, how do you market yourself? How do you create an offer for online?
Mm-hmm.
And so all of the different systems that are involved in scaling. And I worked with like someone, essentially what I do now, and I got connected. And that's really when I started to take off online, is once I really understood what systems to implement and how to sell
Mm-hmm.
myself and how to market myself. And about a year into online coaching myself, I decided to travel while doing it. So it's kind of living the dream, maybe, that people see on Instagram, where you see someone traveling and they're working from their laptop. And it definitely is more glamorous online than the reality of
Sure.
it. But as I'm sure you understand, but I had a lot of personal trainers and coaches reach out to me, and they wanted me to help them do the same thing. And so it just organically took off into the place that it is now, where I have taught other people how to do that. And that's one of our
Mm-hmm.
connections. Alexa is one of my students, and she's done really well. So yeah, that's just me in a nutshell. I'm living in Hawaii right now, but slowed down on the travel this year.
It's really exciting. I think that probably if you've listened to a few of these, I don't mention it too much, but I've had a lot of travel and that's to the listeners as well. If you've listened to a few of these, like I've traveled quite a bit. I was very fortunate when I was younger to be able to do that. I lived in Europe a little bit. I have a Hungarian background, and I think it's so important to be able to travel, not only for the freedom that it brings, but to experience other cultures and help put a lot of your own things in your own life in perspective. And so, like, I'm curious, what kind of countries did you travel to?
Ooh, okay. Australia, Southeast Asia, um, Macau, Hong Kong,
Wow.
New Zealand. New Zealand was my favorite.
Oh,
But
wow.
yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, all down in that area that I actually haven't been to and I really want to get down to. So, I imagine some of those places added a serious new perspective. I'm curious, even curiouser, if what was like the most profound thing from traveling that you learned from your experiences, from just that, from experiencing those other cultures. And I'll take it even one step further. So not only the most awesome thing that you've learned, but how you're able to implement into your life now.
Yeah, I love this question. So I think the biggest thing for me was being around other cultures and environments where people are raised with, very little, and they grow up with very little, and they're some of the happiest people. And it was so
Yeah.
cool just being surrounded by that and seeing them smiling. And for me, when I then moved out of that environment, I definitely took part of that with me. And I'm someone that I don't need a lot to be happy. And I do feel like I could almost live a similar lifestyle to how they're living,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of their attitude rubbed off on me in that way. So I really love that and value that. And I think about, how I spend my money and what I really need,
Mm-hmm.
and just
Mm-hmm.
kind of fall
Mm-hmm.
into that like Southeast
Mm-hmm.
Asia
Yeah.
mentality, I guess.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It's hard, or I would say it's easy to get wrapped up in it when you do have the money and the amenities and everything is available. Next day shipping, I don't know if I'm going to get used to that. Next thing, I'm going to order it and it's going to fall out of the computer into my hands or something. Like it's going to just poof right there. But to live in a society like that, you're absolutely right. Because I will say, though, when I've traveled to other countries, whether it be as a civilian or in the military, when you're there and you don't have access to those amenities, and I'm talking about basic like water and these other things, and then obviously all the way to the other end of the spectrum where all the technology, when you don't have access to these kind of things, you're like, oh, I guess I don't really need to be on my cell phone, or I don't really need to do these kind of things, or I don't need to check my email, or I don't need to, whatever it is. So it's really cool that you're able to take that, but still apply it. Because one of the things I try to hammer into the head of everybody that listens here and to myself, because these are all for me, like I said in the very beginning of the conversation as well, like I need to continuously learn, but is the application of all the things that we're continuously discussing. So it's cool. All right, awesome. Bri, you went and you traveled and you did all this stuff, you saw this stuff, and it impacted you, but to be able to apply it to your life right now, I think is extremely special. And then going back to what you said about your coaching business, for it to evolve organically, I think is a beautiful thing in the sense of like these conversations. I kind of articulated that to you. That is an organic conversation, and I didn't even plan on talking about travel. Here we are. We're talking about these awesome things. So to see your company evolve into that too, and what I get for that for the listeners is if you're doing something and you're good at something, or if you're just okay at something, because a lot of times when you're really good at something, you think you might just be okay, but other people don't know how to do it. If they're asking you how to do it, that might be a key indicator to something that you can do and then leverage to have fun in and also make money in. So that's really exciting. I love that you shared all that. It's really cool.
Yeah, I do have a quick note on that I
Mm-hmm.
guess I didn't really elaborate on, but essentially I actually created a new business while in another country. So
Oh,
I
wow. Okay.
had this I had this shift where I went from like extremely passionate about nutrition and training and still passionate about it, but I became almost more passionate about business growth and scaling and developing like that side of my mindset. And even the things I was reading, podcasts I was listening, that became more my passion. So, kind of to add on to your note of it's scary no matter what,
Yeah.
but I think if you have something that you're passionate about and you find that you would do it for free or learn about it all the time,
Mm-hmm.
that's probably
Mm-hmm.
a good choice to follow that.
Yeah, and it's so cool that you said that, because one of the things I try to say to people as well, it's the Kristof Lewis podcast, Create Your Career, and I put the Create Your Career in there a little bit later in the podcast to properly articulate to people the keyword of create, to do something, and you can be doing other things, you can be in other places, but if you do put the work behind it, you can create something that is completely non-existent, and it's really neat to hear that you did that in a completely different country, and then obviously you're able to do that and travel and then just be wherever you want doing what you want, and to be able to do something like that, and that's a lot of the freedom that a lot of people are after, and it sounds like that's clearly what you're after as well.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think I realized even how much I did value it because I come from a
Mm-hmm.
very small town in Kansas. My parents are entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
Interesting.
been an
So,
amazing
so
journey.
that's a great tangent, because I was literally about to take us back to young Bri and say, how did you begin to acquire this mindset? How did you fall into all of these things that you subscribe to? These like I said, like behaviors, mindset, this application of knowledge. Obviously, that's an organic evolution as well. But can you take us back to, like, were you always like this? Were you different? And then, like, what was that change? How did that change occur?
Yeah. Oh, this is such a loaded question and answer, and I love it. But
Cha-ching.
so yeah, and this is something not many people know about me, and it's kind of hard to even organically bring it up, maybe. But actually, ever since I can remember, like back to 6 or 5 years old,
Mm-hmm.
I had a very severe speech impediment. Like I would stutter very badly, especially with words that were B's and D's. And so my name is Bri Berner, and you can imagine
The
I
humanity.
never wanted. Yeah, I've been cursed. You can imagine I never wanted to like meet new
Yeah.
people or introduce myself or go to new places. And so it started there. And I think I had around the 8th grade, it was a pretty like pivotal moment where I was actually YouTubing like strategies to overcome this. And I figured out a lot of having a speech impediment is psychological. So there's certain things that you say to yourself, or maybe an experience you've had younger as a kid that is causing you to have this speech impediment. And so I realized one of the biggest things to overcoming it is pushing myself into situations where essentially I was going to probably fall on my face and stutter.
Yeah.
But if I just like secluded myself and isolated myself, I would never overcome it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started doing that more and more and more, and it improved more and more and more. And that is like the point that I felt like my mindset got the strongest, because it was like I learned the biggest lesson of, pushing myself into uncomfortable situations does reward me. And I also have to not, fear what other people are going to think of me, because, what I think of myself is really what matters the most.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I have to do to like overcome the situation. So Yeah, it's that's like probably one of the biggest stories that I
Yeah.
have, that I'm like, I know that my mindset comes from doing that, because it was so hard, like going through school and just being like terrified to talk to people. And
Yeah.
here we are.
Yeah, that's so cool. And thank you for sharing that. That's really special. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to that in some way or another. I always say, like, insert your variable. Like, whatever we're talking about, it's not just strictly that case study. It's like your own thing that you're struggling with, and using the example of you to be able to say that, hey, you can get through it. But I think it's really special because it's tough to share those. It's also, I remember myself at those ages, and especially eighth grade, I didn't know my ass from my elbow, and I think it would have been really difficult for me to have that conversation with myself, like, let's do some research on my own, let's not seclude myself, because it's so easy to seclude yourself and not want to do that, because, I mean, you're in eighth grade when you're doing that, and quite honestly, I didn't begin this evolution of this capacity of a mindset until my maybe 24, 25, so like mid 20s. I mean, I was always in some shape or form me, of course, but it didn't really
Yeah.
expedite until then. So I think it's really cool
Yeah.
that it happened at such a young age, and I know that it gives hope to other people that do struggle with something like that. And on the inverse, I will go and say that if you're older, if right now and you're struggling with, I definitely don't think it's never too late ever to make that change and to step out of the comfort zone. And it sounds like, I love how you answer that, because it sounds like that has propelled you into what your mindset is now, and being able to leverage that, be like, hey, I did it then, I did it for probably the hardest thing in your life at the time, and then what else can I leverage that for, and utilize that mindset to kind of step out of the shadows and face the monster. I think that's really incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Wow.
thank you so much. I definitely would say that's true about leveraging that experience, and
Sure.
just about any other hard experience I have now. It gives me perspective on, yeah, what I can do, I guess.
So that's really neat. And as everybody knows on here, I really like talking to badass people like yourself. But always my stipulation is to speak with people that help people, because I only want to highlight. I'm very discretionary when it comes to this, because I only want to highlight people that are helping other people. I think there's a lot of awesomeness that goes out in the world. You mentioned on Instagram as well that people are, I'm traveling and it's cool and so what and so forth. But I love highlighting the people that help other people, because I want to encourage that. I want to continuously encourage that, even as you are continuing to develop yourself. So, having said that, the listeners already know, but where does your passion from helping other people, where you could just stop and just continue this evolution in of yourself, continue to travel, continue to do whatever, but why do you choose to help and teach other people? I know you kind of touched on it with it organically evolved, but I think if there wasn't a
Yeah.
true deep passion for it, maybe you wouldn't have done it.
Yeah, so true. I always think about really everyone that I work with, even when I was doing health coaching to now mentoring people. I view my students truly as former versions of me. So
Okay.
I never think of them as like Molly that lives in Missouri, like I truly visualize like this
Wow.
person's
That's
exactly
cool.
like me. So yeah, I think that that really shows in like my coaching calls, and really allows me to bring empathy, which is a big part of what I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's strategy, but I think if you spoke to any of my students, you'd know that there's a lot more that goes into it, as far as, relating to them and making sure that they feel seen and heard. And we have more of a like personal development along with our coaching calls. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
That's really incredible. I'm trying to remember the quote right now. Oh, it's the golden rule, of course. How could I be so naive? Treat everybody as you want to be treated. But then I say
Yeah.
that because I can't remember where I heard this, but somebody else said, oh gosh, and somebody's going to know this as I'm saying this, but don't treat everybody as you want to be treated. Treat everybody how, like, as that's just another version of yourself. And it might have been on the Joe Rogan podcast, and it might have been Jordan Peterson. But I thought that was very unique. So I think treating somebody, and I think about that, like, that's just me in another body, and I know that's not what it is, and somebody might think that, but I'm just saying, before we get too deep
Yeah.
here, I'm gonna get way off track. But essentially, if you subscribe to what Bri said here, I think it's really special, and I think it brings a whole new perspective to the golden rule, and I think it's really special that you do that. So
Yeah,
that's
I love that.
interesting. So, have you had any problems throughout, or interesting obstacles throughout this journey of which is your life, through which is your coaching career, that maybe you thought that you wouldn't be able to do it anymore. Maybe traveling was going to be out of the case anymore. It wasn't going to be there anymore, or just anything that you were doing. Anything interesting like that? And then what lessons did you learn from that?
Oh, yes, quite a few different ones, I guess. The first one that comes to mind was quite recently. I was living in New Zealand, and by like this weird circumstance, it must have been the wrong person, the wrong day, but they actually like deported me from New Zealand.
Awesome.
And so this is one of those like wild stories, right? Where you're like, me when I have kids in the future.
That's
and
why
I'm
New
telling
Zealand
them,
was so fun.
yeah, their mom got deported from New Zealand. Wild story, right? But it actually caused me to really like reflect and think about what I was feeling then and what I wanted to feel in the future. Like I really used that to guide my goals, and that happened the beginning of this year. And so I was like, what do I need to feel like safe and comfortable and mentally in the right state for my business? And so that's actually why I ended up here in Hawaii. I kind of realized that I wanted to stay in the US in some capacity, but yeah, that's the most recent struggle or obstacle that happened to me.
Wow. That's interesting. We don't have to go into that right now.
Yeah, pretty wild.
As long as you learn from it, you're like, I'm gonna go back to Hawaii because it's kind of like a different country, but they can't deport me because I'm a citizen. No.
It really is. Yeah, it's just like it doesn't even feel like mainland. Yeah.
That's so funny. And I've never been out there, so I need to make a trip out there and do all of the awesomeness, which is Hawaii. Yeah. I might, and that's maybe why we're not making the trip out there, but. So obviously you do a lot of coaching. It's interesting that you evolve from fitness to online personal coach. It's more of like a business coach. So obviously that entails a lot of education, and I'm massive on talking about education, continued education. I want to learn till the day I die. But what is one of the best ways or things that you utilize to ensure that you continue to subscribe to a growth mindset and continue your education to best serve yourself and your clients?
Yeah, I love this. So I always say I'm a forever student. So it's definitely built into like my daily habits, but I do find different people that I know, like if I'm maybe not the best in a certain area of my coaching, I'll seek out someone that can teach me about that. So this last year I worked with two different business like the coaches, and that's probably the biggest learning opportunity is working with people that have the lifestyle that you want to have, and that can teach you certain elements of it to teach your students. And then books for sure. I saw you're reading a book a week. Is that right?
I'm trying to. I'm struggling. Like I'm 38 in, and it's really difficult. It's not as easy as it looks. It's been tough, but no. I answer it that way because I'm doing that as well, and it is one of my favorite ways to learn though. And then again, as long as I'm able to implement and apply what I'm learning, then it seems to be a pretty badass way to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to pick your brain maybe later on about your top 5 books.
Ooh, I would love to talk that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I read about like a book every 3 weeks, but I could step it up and get on your level.
As soon as I'm done with the 52 weeks, which is in like March or something, or May, I can't remember. I think it's May. But as soon as I'm done, I'm going to go and slow down because I want to read longer books and I want to enjoy them. Because sometimes like it's good to have a goal, but sometimes I'm not enjoying it as much as I could. So no, absolutely. And like set your own goal. That's a great thing to put in here, interject into here, is like set your own goal, what's good for you. So I think you mentioned reading, I think you mentioned podcasts, and then learning from others, which is a really huge thing. And that's something you can do. Learning from others, you're learning through others through books, you're learning through others through podcasts. So, but to be able to do that in person from other people, like you were talking about, the people that we're hanging out with, those type of people that we're conversing with are the best people too. And like I told you again, I'll bring it back again. I was in a super huge funk, but even talking to you and having this type of conversation reiterates and gives me the confidence on why I'm doing what I am doing, and that all that other negativity in my life is just like, it's serious noise. And even though it's troublesome, you need to be able to thwart it with the awesomeness of conversation and learning from other people. So I do enjoy that. I'm gonna go into, as you saw on Instagram, and for everybody, we're doing a new segment. I just started it last time about asking questions to the guests. I put out a question sticker 24 hours in advance, and I allow the listeners to ask questions to you. So I wrote down a couple of them here. We got a bunch of them, but I'm only going to ask like one or two of them. So let's see. I'm going to randomly pick them. So if I don't ask yours, I'm sorry. But here's a really good one. Have you ever given up on a client? If yes, why? And did you regret it? If no, what's the closest you come to giving up, and how did you overcome that? So this is a couple things here. So
Yeah.
have you ever given up on a client? Yeah.
Yeah. I would say I've never given up on a client as long as they are communicating. So that's something I actually talk about in our first call together is I don't care if you didn't do something I told you to do last week, or, something happened in your personal life and you didn't do it. But as long as you show up to our calls together and you communicate, that will move you forward. It's the people that don't communicate and quote unquote ghost that, and they know what they're doing essentially. And I can reach out as many times as I can to get them to show up onto the calls. But at the end of the day, they have to be the ones that, want it. And I try to, within my coaching, on our first call, it's really all about figuring out their why and diving deep into their why. So I don't know where this comes from, but there's an exercise that's like getting people to their seventh why is really their true why. So if you ask someone about, hey, why would this be important to you? Usually the first answer they'll give you is pretty surface level.
Yeah.
And the seventh one, they're just about ready to cry, or almost should cry if it's really important, as, maybe sadistic as that sounds. I'm not trying to make people cry,
Sure.
It happens. So I would say I don't give up on people, but they also have to do the work and show up themselves too.
It's really special. That's really special. I think asking why is really important, and it's like relating it to kids. And kids are like, one of the things I promised myself when I was a kid was don't forget that you were a kid. And I think questioning everything, and even, like a kid's like, why? But like, there's so much truth to that. So I do love that. And I would imagine that in 7 layers of whys, that, well, it's like folding a paper. Obviously, you can't fold it more than 7 times. So by 7th why, you've hit ground zero.
Yeah.
Oh man, like, no, that's really cool.
But yeah.
That's funny. No, that's awesome. That's a really, really good one. That was a good question. Thank you for asking that. Let's see, real quick here. All right, well, let's do this one. This one could go any direction. So what do you believe is the best piece of advice you've ever given a client?
I would have to say one that resonates with everyone across the board, especially when you are newer to showing up online or in the online space and providing value, is that who you are, exactly who you are, like all of your quirks and like quote unquote imperfections, those are what connects you to other people. And that's what people want to see in order to work with you. Actually, like, people think it is that perfect self or that highlight reel, and that people want to see that, and that's the only thing that you should be portraying. But time and time again, and I think that this stood out to me, is when people would comment on certain things like, hey, I want to work with you because you don't always have your hair done, or you don't have makeup on, or like sometimes you do stumble over your words. Like, I like that you're a real person. And I think that makes other people, it helps them show up more authentically online, and that's, their personality shows out.
Yeah, that's cool, because they don't think that they have to be perfect to show up to a conversation with you. And I enjoy that. I've tried to do that through this podcast. This podcast has been one of the hardest things I've ever done in my entire life, starting from, goodness gracious, if you want to laugh, you go back to the first couple ones and you hear me like trying to talk like a robot and ask questions, and like, it's so terrible. So I do believe then again, I think you're guest number 127. So like, it's like, just keep up with it, and you get better. And the funny thing about that is, and what you said is, like, embrace your quirks and connect, or quirks connect you. Like, honestly, quirks connect you. So embrace that. And that could probably be a t-shirt. But what I'm saying is, like, the more okay, so I kind of relate to, like, your story as a kid, like getting yourself out of the shadows to fight the monster. Like, me podcasting has been absolutely terrifying, and quite frankly, that's why I was a little butthurt before this conversation, because I get a lot of flack from people for certain things, and I don't voice it at all, because I don't want to give any voice to negativity. But throughout all these kind of conversations, 200 plus episodes total, I've continued to find my voice and find my strength and find out who I really am. So I believe that embracing your quirks and allowing your quirks to connect you with other people, and just being strong for yourself, and just fighting through all that bullshit, honestly, gosh, it gets me so frustrated. But just being that person allows you to find more of who you are. And I think that's all encompassing of all of the topics that you've been able to speak to us to about tonight.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I'm glad you shared that. And I love, first of all, this interview in general. I've loved how you've kind of guided it and shared your own stories within it. And I think I can resonate with the fact that, like, your first one maybe wasn't the best.
Oh God.
my videos, like, I create a lot of content, and it's funny, people see me on video now and they're like, oh, I could never make videos like that. And I'm like, oh, see the first one.
Yeah. And you leave, I don't know about you, but I mean, I definitely leave mine up there. You can go back and see every single episode, and you can see the evolution of everything, but one thing I've always promised myself is just be me 100%. Like, you hear be your authentic self. That is something I've really tried to subscribe to this entire journey, and I've allowed, again, I found myself even more, and I know that I will continue to find myself, and I know there's still going to be a-holes out there, doing whatever, being internet police and everything, but it is what it is. So I've equally thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with you. I want to thank the guests for suggesting these questions. Obviously, I didn't have I had about a half a page of them on here, so I didn't have time to go through all those, but I've really appreciated it. Before we get out of here for the night, though, I'd love to hear where people can contact you, websites and handles, or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm hanging out the most on Instagram, and my Instagram handles at Bri_Berner. So that's BRI_BERNER. And then my link has all the different links as far as my website, and application form is all there too.
Easy day. You all will be able to find all of that information and more in the show notes, whether you're on YouTube, iTunes, Apple, wherever you're listening, Podbean. I do appreciate it. Bri, like I said, thank you so much for your time. It's been so enjoyable, and I love having these type of conversations. This was a really good one, and I appreciate your time, and have a great rest of your night.